The fourth part. This is the fourth part of Biography of a Hill, taking the biography of Grinlow from 1760 to the formation of BCA. The Dukes of Devonshire's estates at Chatsworth extended over many thousands of acres. They included most of Buxton for many centuries. They owned all land, even more when it was enclosed. They received rents from land and cottages. All inns were theirs, and all tolls paid to travel on their turnpike roads contributed to their coffers. All mineral rights were theirs, and they took a percentage of all ores extracted. To increase his wealth and status, the fifth Duke had the Crescent built in Buxton, a small village in the 1780s and half a day's carriage ride from Chatsworth. He controlled all development of his new inland purpose-built tourist attraction. The sixth Duke promoted the concept of modern Buxton and sponsored its growth from 1848 into a successful spa resort and holiday destination. He was responsible for the establishment of the plantations still surrounding us, most of which are owned and managed by BCA and freely open to the public throughout the year. I wonder how the fifth and sixth Dukes would feel about working people just enjoying their exclusive lands. As you start the climb up the main path to Solomon's Temple, turn around. Below you is a unique architectural legacy, the crescent, the domes, but your feet are walking in the steps of the common people. Here on Grinlow, this natural landscape was constantly excavated, mined and burnt to make money for the landowners. The patronage of the Dukes of Devonshire decided levels of luxury or starvation. As Mick Aston, archaeologist on Time Team, said,
"When you look at a piece of archaeology, you shouldn't see it in isolation. Context is all important in explaining why the pieces are where they are, rather than anywhere else."
This quotation is so relevant when you look down at the crescent and the stables, outstanding and unique architecture that is just not seen in any other small town in the UK. And then, as you turn to examine the humps and bumps of Grinlow that helped to make a duke's fortune. His 47 years as duke were greatly influenced by the behaviour of the Prince Regent. The landed gentry set the tone, and Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire, commanded the ton. This wealth, idleness and indulgence of the ton is portrayed in the current series of Bridgerton on Netflix. The ton prescribed the manners of high society. William Cavendish was a great friend of the regent, a drinking partner, creditor, fellow gambler and philanderer. The aristocracy raised or lowered the social tone. These great landowners set the standards of the day. As the fifth Duke came into his title aged 16 in 1764, more people lived in rural communities than in towns and cities. And by the end of the Regency, that position had been reversed and the urban age was upon us. Improved roads, canals, a rising population in teeming cities, steam trains and relentless material progress, all needing limestone. Britain was still small enough to be governed by an aristocratic oligarchy of 200 peers and 28 dukes and a monarch.
The hierarchy of the House of Lords was Duke, Marquis, Viscount, Lord. The House of Commons was for their sons, cousins, in-laws and friends.
In 1774, when the fifth Duke married Georgiana Spencer, their carriage alone cost £564. Their esteemed graces married in secret 2 days earlier because they knew the London streets would be full of crowds celebrating their wedding on the actual day. The Devonshire crest was as easily recognised as the Regent's. Georgiana was a trendsetter. It was she who introduced the fashion for huge feathers in a headdress, and she had to sit on the floor of her carriage to keep them on. Her sole purpose as Duchess was to provide an heir. Unfortunately, that took 16 years. She was young, intelligent, and a very popular celebrity, wrote plays and enjoyed politics, studied mineralogy and promoted new artists.
As Whigs, the Devonshires supported the Regent. They all had very expensive tastes and extravagant gambling habits, with gambling debts in 1784 equivalent to £6 million in today's money. There were balls and gambling until early morning. Chatsworth was treated like an inn for the aristocracy.
In 1775, the Devonshires were advised all to go to Buxton to bathe in the waters to help his gout and the Duchess's headaches. They believed strongly in the efficacy of the Buxton spa treatment, but they stayed in Buxton Hall. The Duke decided it needed an upgrade.
The building of the Crescent was set to rival Bath. The turnpikes had improved the roads so that the mail coach from London to Edinburgh could swiftly travel north, bringing with it the aristocracy. The Prince rested at Newhaven on his way north and commented favourably on the beautiful inn.
The Crescent cost him £38,601 and was built with just 1 year's profit from his copper mines at Ecton. He could afford the services of John Carr, architect of York, who designed 5 lodging houses in a crescent shape, an assembly room, card rooms and shops that included a wig and a hairdresser.
Except for a few mean inns and miserable lodging houses, where accommodation was wretched in the extreme, little had been done. It was reserved for His Grace to rescue it from a state of relative barbarity and to lay the foundation of a village at present as remarkable for its beauty and its elegance as for the healing properties of its springs. Jewett, 1811.
1780.
The Duke's latest project was the construction of the Crescent Hotels and Mineral Baths complex. He used £21,500 to purchase coal mines. He also purchased a pair of shoes for £23, which is the same as he paid a labourer, wife and family for a year's work in the Grinlow quarry.
1784.
When Lady Spencer visited again, work was well underway.
Very magnificent new hotel complex indeed, and the plantations on top of the surrounding hills, which are begun and I am told are to be continued, are a glorious work and will in time be as beneficial as beautiful.
Buxton's Ring of Trees begins.
1786.
The Great Hotel opened. This was the name given to the private apartments of the Duke and Duchess in the centre third of the complex, situated below the Devonshire crest. The Duke and Duchess found it better than they had expected. There were cards, billiards, extra dining and a coffee room. Plays were performed at the rear of the Crescent for several nights. The colonnades at the front of the Crescent enabled guests to reach the assembly room without getting wet. Here there were opportunities to show off daughters to the eligible rich.
But the seasonal fogs were unwholesome.
Lady Spencer, Georgiana's mother, was a great advocate for Buxton. Her mother admitted Georgiana was, at the end of January 1787,
looking vastly well
after a stay at the Crescent. But the Duke and Duchess hardly used their apartments after 1788, and it quickly became called the Central.
1790.
Hart, the 6th Duke, was born in Paris during the French Revolution. Marie Antoinette was his godmother. However, no more visits are recorded to Buxton due to the affair of Georgiana with Lord Grey. An illegitimate baby, the French Revolution, and then, as a gift for the reconciliation, Georgiana is given Chiswick House as a project to refashion. From 1800, Chiswick House in London was the favourite residence of the Devonshires. They had 7 great houses, 3 in London, and a castle. Georgiana continued as a London socialite, a fashionista, and a leader of the ton.
In this presentation, we want to show through primary sources that the attitude to the poor changed as the Industrial Revolution progressed. A visit to the poor was considered as part of a tourist tour of the rugged romantic Peak District. The view of Grinlow from the Crescent was not initially screened. Lady Spencer records a visit to the quarries. In fact, Grinlow was a destination for tourists to visit the poor. There was a fashion for sentiment, as seen in this painting exhibited in 1793.
This large oil painting shows 2 fashionably dressed children in a romantic countryside setting, encountering an older boy who is dressed in ragged clothes and visibly in distress. A succession of paintings on such themes was exhibited at public displays. They were designed to appeal to the current fashion for sentiment, heightened feelings of sympathy and pity, apparent in poetry, novels and essays, as well as the visual arts. The painter, Sir William Beechey, exhibited at the Royal Academy. In the portrait of Sir Francis Ford's Children Giving a Coin to a Beggar Boy, the two rich children are Francis and Mary Ford, the children of Sir Francis Ford, 1758 to 1801, of Embercourt, Surrey, and Leers, Barbados. He was a wealthy plantation owner and politician. The well-dressed girl leans forward to pass the boy a coin, while a dog, a well-groomed spaniel, presumably belonging to the wealthy children, looks up. Such emotive scenes of rural poverty and philanthropic kindness were a feature of British art in the latter third of the 18th century. Francis Ford was born in Barbados and was of the fourth generation of Fords to be plantation owners in Barbados. He owned extensive property in the West Indies and upheld a strong pro-slavery stance in his activities as a Member of Parliament. The children represented in this picture were direct beneficiaries of the wealth made through enslaved labour. The pro-slavery lobby often claimed that the quality of life that the plantation owners provided for enslaved people in the West Indies was better than that enjoyed by working people in England. The unusual emphasis given in this picture to the abject poverty and desperation of the beggar boy might then be giving visual form to the familiar pro-slavery sentiment concerning poverty.
Walking was very fashionable pastime for the Georgian gentry. In May 1783, Lady Spencer spent much of her time in Buxton, going on walks with Lord Frederick Cavendish. In a letter she wrote about a walk to Grin Hill, she wrote about the increase in lime production. This was to be used to make more land available for cultivation in the Duke's newly enclosed Hartington Manor. She was entranced by the lime houses on Grin, and even had poor families in mind that they would be suitable for. They make very comfortable habitations, and most of them are filled with a man and a woman and a fine brood of healthy-looking children. All they want is a door, which some of them have not, a little window, and a chimney composed of a few stones and a little turf. I quite long to settle some remarkable, near ingenious poor family in one of these. One woman has got an inch of garden where she has planted a few potatoes. The earth of which it is composed was brought up the hill by her children in buckets. 1789, Pilkington records
dwellings dug out of the ash waste adjacent to the Grin lime kilns.
These were not unique to the area, for Daniel Defoe described one on Brassington Moor in the early 1720s. French geologist Faugy de Saint-Fond wrote in 1784,
The old tribe, like so many moles, had formed their residences underground. I felt much pleasure in visiting the houses of these troglodytes.
According to Jewett in 1811, 200 people lived on Grin in these houses. Rhodes, 1818, described the roofs of the limehouse,
which are partially covered with turf and heath, and not infrequently a cow or an ass takes a station near the chimney on top of the hut.
Leach asserts that
whilst the houses probably repelled rainwater, they must have suffered from ground damp. This may not have been any worse than some of the poorer stone cottages. Reference to chimneys indicates the use of fires which were necessary for cooking and heating.
The Duke's agent let the poor labourers who had scooped out these dwellings live in them for nothing. Older women received 5 shillings a week as guides into Pool's Hole, and children sold Buxton Diamonds as souvenirs to visitors.
The significance of this story in relationship to Grinlow is important because it shows how local history can verify what we understand was happening with the relationship of rich and poor in Georgian/Regency period. It reinforces the evidence that was presented by the Beechey painting. Rather than being seen as an eyesore, the smouldering lime tips and ever-present working life was seen as part of a visit to Buxton by the wealthy. A useful primary source is a children's storybook, The Buxton Diamonds, written at the beginning of the 19th century, and was provided for the amusement and instruction of children. It tells the story of Emily, who was staying with her papa, Mr. W., who is in Buxton for the healing waters. She is instructed to visit the poor of Grinlow Hill, while her papa takes his daily walk on the terrace. She is praised throughout the book for her kindness towards grateful Ellen, who she discovers living in one of the limehouses. She buys the Buxton diamonds Ellen and her brothers and sisters collect to sell to the tourists who are intrigued by their troglodyte life.
Emily found a little passage through an entrance in the rock, which, as it presented nothing formidable and appeared but of short extent, she entered. It led to a hut scooped out of rock, consisting of 3 rooms, in one of which was a bright blazing peat fire on the hearth. The ceiling was not very lofty, and instead of being whitewashed, as those cottages of the poor generally are, it was bare rock, and the ground was formed of a similar material. It went by the name of Grinlow Hill. Many little abodes similar to that they were in had been scooped out by the labourers out of the rock, or formed beneath heaps of lime ashes, which had been thrown together and hardened upon it. And so, continued Ellen, when you are upon the hill, you will perceive the smoke of our little peat fire rising, as it were, from the ground, without being able to tell where it came from. Yes, said Emily, that puzzled me. I saw smoke ascend from a little hillock covered with thyme, around which the lambs were grazing, without knowing whence it proceeded. I think Grinlow Hill bears some resemblance to a rabbit warren. The ground hereabouts belongs to the Duke's estate. He says that in consideration of the industry of these poor labourers who have scooped out their dwellings, they should live in them for nothing. My grandmother receives 5 shillings a week as the guide in Pool's Hole. Then I do what I can by selling Buxton diamonds, specimens of spar, which the miners give me, said Ellen. There is little evidence of any Buxton diamonds, as they were of little value, although there is a hill just south of Grinlow called Diamond Hill, and maybe that was the source of these specimens of spar.
The main route to Solomon's Temple through Grinlow is an ancient holloway used to transport lime to Cheshire for centuries. 40 pack horses at a time would travel from Grinlow up to Long Hill through Gadley Ford on a route that can still be distinguished and is mainly on public footpaths today. Due to the Enclosure Acts, drovers had to use many of these enclosed roads and pay tolls to the Duke. The Duke was a wealthy, powerful and ambitious landowner. Only the rich and powerful could afford the lawyers needed to prove land ownership for enclosure.
Wood had all been stripped from Grinlow by 1790. Coal came from the coal mines on Axe Edge. This was of very poor quality and was the cause of large lime slag tips. Some were hollowed out for homes.
It was an industrial scene of desolation.
Smoke.
From kilns and coke ovens.
Quarries.
Devouring the landscape.
40 pack horses.
Pulling lime wagons, churning ever-deepening tracks through the peat.
Men.
Wheelbarrowing lime and ash.
Women.
Hauling 25-kilogram corves of stone, that is to say, baskets of limestone, to waiting pack horses.
And children.
Collecting rocks, building walls, bringing water from Wye Head, or looking after animals.
Our Jack of all trades memorializes this. Archaeological remains of these early kilns explain the humps and bumps on Grinlow. Wood was used to ignite the coal above the grid. Limestone lumps were barrowed round and loaded from the top. Burning was controlled by partially blocking the stoking hole. Quicklime was raked out from the bottom. It took 3 or 4 days to burn the lime and 2 more for cooling. Larger kilns had stone linings and were kept running by adding layers of stone and coal and then lime from the top, whilst quicklime was raked out at the bottom.
A family group would have a typical cut. The Duke's land agent decided when it was dormant or not. He would award 10 or 20-year leases to the head of the family. The Duke took all the royalties as he owned all the mineral rights. Royalties were also paid on each corve. Hidden amongst amidst the quickly sprouting ash trees, you can see here a typical cut. Quarrying was a family business. Women carried the 25-kilogram corves. It was loaded onto their wagons or barrowed to the nearest kiln, which was burnt with layers of wood and local coal. Dig, crush, carry, repeat. Then repeat faster because an industrial revolution is going on. Imagine the smoke and dust from the kilns and noise of 40 horses with loaded panniers. Hundreds of people worked and lived here.
So much noise and mess eventually drove the 6th Duke to move all mineral rights to the south side of Grinlow. No mining was permitted in sight of the crescent. The 6th, or bachelor Duke, unlike his father, invested hugely in Chatsworth. Buxton was a vital source of revenue with the expansion of its popularity due to railway mania. He used his income to advance his horticultural passions and employed Joseph Paxton, Chatsworth garden designer, to modernise Buxton's image. From 1825, coal and lime were moved by rail, so all activity was on the south side. The Duke gained extra money for the extra purity of the lime from these quarries, as they could be used for chemical production. From the Gazetteer of the British Isles, 1820.
Buxton as a watering place is remarkable for its dry, bracing climate. It has long been famous for its mineral waters, especially of service in cases of gout and rheumatism, diseases of the skin and nervous disorders. The sterility, which once formed the chief feature in the scenery round Buxton, is fast disappearing. Extensive woods and plantations now clothe the sides and summits of many neighbouring hills.
Paxton wrote of the Victorian fashion for planting masses of the same species.
For slopes and summits of hills, diversity of trees becomes of less consequence. A bank of beeches or oaks is preferable on a steep slope to a variety of trees.
Paxton's beech plantations, to hide the scars of quarrying, can be observed in masses of beech planted to screen Grinlow.
A recollection by Jessie Aldcock, granddaughter of Frank Redfern.
When Frank Redfern was appointed custodian of the cave by the 6th Duke of Devonshire in 1853, Paul's Cavern was already a well-known tourist attraction.
By 1850, the guides were no longer living in lime houses, having been rehoused in cottages on Green Lane. They charged a penny for a candle and a penny to go into the cave. However, the visitors were unescorted, and it was probably during this time that damage to the formation occurred. The famous flitch of bacon in the main chamber became a casualty when almost half a metre was broken from the end of the stalactite.
Frank Redfern erected the wrought iron turnstiles where visitors paid sixpence to be escorted down the cave. He installed candelabras to light the cave. At the end of the tour, having crossed the river by the stepping stones, Frank would stand on the largest stone and allow visitors back across the river once they had dropped a tip in his hat.
The cottagers of Green Lane were angry at losing their income from tourists. They attempted to sabotage Redfern's new enterprise by daubing tar over the turnstile, which would stain the visitors' clothes as they squeezed through.
When the 6th Duke heard of this, he immediately had the families evicted from Green Lane and rehoused them in far-off Burbage.
Frank Redfern lived at the Cavern in the curator's house until 1881. He also ran a museum full of curiosities and kept monkeys in the building we still call the Monkey House near the entrance. This closed in the 1960s.
The Burbage magazine of 1863 recorded that
a very sad incident occurred at Doveholes by the falling of a room cut out of the lime ashes in which 2 women and 2 children lost their lives. We should be thankful we have had no such accidents to note in Burbage, where lime huts used to be all too common.
In the 1841 census, limehouses are recorded in Burbage, and an 1855 survey refers to lime ash cottages, but there is no reference to them in the 1861 census. Remains of a limehouse exist on land in Burbage below the Leek Road. It was listed in March 2006 by Historic England.
Limehouse, late 18th century, quarried lime refuse and remnants of stone walling. Simple rectangle, open to front and partially open to right hand with overhanging roof. There are traces of stone walling to front right hand. Unique survival of the noted limehouses recorded in contemporary literature from 1780s onwards. A description of 1797 records them as often having 3 or 4 rooms and being built next to the lime kiln. An example is illustrated in A. Jewett's History of Buxton, 1811.
Meanwhile, hidden from view on the south side of Grin, quarrying continued. In Victorian times, quarrying in and near Buxton had become like Game of Thrones, with now just 13 big firms. And by 1891, they owned 17 quarries and 100 kilns, including the 1879 Hoffman kiln at Harper Hill.
New technologies were devised to transport Buxton lime throughout the Industrial Revolution, with the brightest engineers of the day improving kilns, creating canals and a tramway system that would even include the Anderton boat lift. Buxton lime products were needed in Runcorn and across to Liverpool as the Lever brothers set up their factory at Port Sunlight. Railway mania came to Grinlow Quarry in 1825 with the Cromford and High Peak Railway, which linked the quarries. The railway network had a huge impact on the movement of lime, with 50 to 60 trainloads of lime being transported near Buxton each week. Coal was soon brought in by rail to power the kilns, as the quality of the local Buxton coal was so poor.
1935 to 45 saw women back at the quarry face, drilling, blasting and pushing tubs, just as they would have done 300 years ago on the other side of Grinlow. Grinlow Quarry closed in 1972. Everything Victorian was considered old-fashioned after the war. Buxton lost many of its railways and the motorways bypassed the town. Its tourists headed for sunny Spain and the cash-strapped council looked for solutions. Redfern's museum was derelict. May the 26th, 1967, Buxton Advertiser.
In considering the pavilion grounds, the special committee have made 2 major proposals. One is that about 1/3 of the 23 acres should be devoted to zoological purposes, and the other that a large lake should be opened up for coarse fishing. The committee have had discussions with Association Pleasure Parks Limited and have visited Flamingo Park in Yorkshire. Part of the gardens should be fenced off and cubs, monkeys, wallabies and small mammals and picturesque and exotic birds introduced.
Later, a fund was discovered, part of reparations after World War II, so the decision was fortunately deferred.
We propose a putt-putt golf course and the decision on the swimming pool reaffirmed.
The Buxton Civic Association was founded by activists who believed that Georgian and Victorian Buxton needed to be saved. Paul's Cavern and Grinlow Woods were purchased from the Chatsworth estate, and the good work of the members of the BCA to save our town from crazy ideas continues. There has been a temple or tower on Grinlow since 1838. It's recorded in William Adams' book Gem of the Peak.
It forms a conspicuous and interesting object from Buxton.
It was built to
afford occupation
to the unemployed of Buxton, but by the end of the century it had
succumbed to wind and became a mere heap of stones.
Amongst these remains, an ancient Bronze Age barrow was discovered, and some of the finds are in Buxton Museum. In 1894, a committee decided the new tower should have
a powerful telescope, stained glass windows and a flagpole.
The sum of £150 was required, and in 1896 Flags flew and Fairfield Band played.
Well, vandalism took away the stained glass windows, oak door and flagpole, and it was in such a dangerous state that it was fenced off. In 1987, the Buxton Advertiser showed a large picture of the fenced-off tower. It was in danger of collapse, and £20,000 was needed for repairs. Buxton Civic Association successfully mounted a campaign to save the tower, and it reopened in 1988. And 55 years on, hundreds of people are back on Grinlow again.
Playing, eating, working, reflecting, enjoying Grin in your own way, a legacy BCA is so proud to protect.
Next time you are admiring the wild flowers in the glades, just look at the soil. It's lime shale, a perfect habitat that wouldn't be there without the old lime burners.
One slow step at a time. The single track lane, known as a holloway, may be thousands of years old, and it was mesmerising to think how many people must have passed this same way. Gradually, all the plodding feet and trampling hooves worked in concert with the rain to scour out an ever deepening crease in the earth, a glorious tunnel of vegetation. How creative the relationship can be between humans and the rest of nature.
Particularly if we take things together, one slow step at a time. That's it.